August 28, 1990, Plainfield, Illinois. Under a suffocating summer sun, families believed it was just another ordinary afternoon, with not a hint that history's only August F5 tornado was minutes away. No sirens, no warning, not even a hint from forecasters. In less than half an hour, the unseen killer, Plainfield's F5, would leave 29 people dead and entire neighborhoods erased. How could the deadliest summer tornado in Illinois strike without a single alarm? And why did every warning system fail the people who needed it most? The answer would change America's approach to disaster forever, and the truth reveals how normal life can vanish in the blink of an eye. By late afternoon, Plainfield simmered under a thick, unmoving sky. The heat index pressed into the mid-90s, making lawns shimmer and playgrounds empty out early. Air conditioners rattled in windows, fighting a losing battle against the humidity. On Main Street, kids biked home with sweat-soaked shirts, while neighbors paused to chat about the relentless weather, not the sky. Inside kitchens, parents prepared dinner or checked the clock for soccer practice, windows closed tight against the heavy air. At Plainfield High, athletes finished drills on the baking field, coaches keeping a wary eye on darkening clouds that looked no different from any late August storm. Nothing about the day felt urgent. The radio forecast called for scattered thunderstorms, the kind that might break the heat for a few minutes before fading away. No one expected more. In backyards, dogs barked at distant thunder, and sprinklers kept running. The only warning was the weight of the afternoon, a stillness that made even the breeze seem absent. Without sirens or alerts, the people of Plainfield moved through their routines, trusting that summer storms were just another part of life. Invisible, high above, the atmosphere churned with energy no one could see. The town remained unaware, every moment drawing closer to a disaster that would strike without a single word of warning. Not a single siren broke the quiet that afternoon. No voice on the radio urged families to seek shelter. The tornado that would erase entire neighborhoods arrived in total silence. No warning, no time to act. Official records show the lead time for Plainfield's F5 was 0. The National Weather Service never issued a tornado warning before impact. In Plainfield, Crest Hill, and the schools in between, emergency sirens stayed silent until the storm had already passed. Even as the sky darkened and thunder rolled, the only alerts came too late to matter. The system depended on visual confirmation. A spotter seeing a funnel, a phone call to emergency managers, a chain of decisions before any siren could sound. But this tornado never showed itself. Rain wrapped the funnel in a curtain of gray, and even trained eyes saw only a wall of wind, rain, and flying debris. Radar operators, working with outdated equipment, watched a severe thunderstorm but missed the telltale signs of rotation. Doppler upgrades that might have revealed the danger were still years away. Parents trusted that if real trouble came, someone would sound the alarm. But every safeguard failed. Weather offices underestimated the risk, relying on August's reputation for calm. Communication lines stayed open but empty, waiting for a warning that never came. In the end, the only clues were the sudden roar, the rattling windows, the sense that something was terribly wrong. Moments before walls collapsed and lives changed forever. The absence of any public alert wasn't just a gap in the system. It was the invisible thread running through every tragedy that followed. With no warning, Plainfield's disaster became a test case for what happens when technology, protocol, and human judgment all fall short at once. 29 people lost their lives in Plainfield that day. More than 350 others suffered injuries, many of them severe. Families were shattered in an instant, some losing parents, children, or siblings with no chance to say goodbye. The tornado destroyed nearly 500 homes, and entire neighborhoods vanished, leaving only splinters and bare foundations where lives had taken root. The scale of loss was almost impossible to grasp as the first reports came in. Emergency crews counted the dead as they sifted through collapsed houses and twisted cars, searching for anyone who might still be alive. Survivors wandered through the debris, dazed and bleeding, calling out for loved ones who would never answer. In the Crest Hill Lakes apartments, 8 people died, including a teenage mother and her infant daughter. At Plainfield High School, a teacher was killed when a truck, hurled by the wind, crashed through his classroom. Hospitals filled with trauma cases in minutes. Some victims arrived with nothing but the clothes on their backs, their homes and possessions erased. Others were rescued from beneath piles of rubble, alive by luck or the quick actions of neighbors. The storm's violence left scars that would last for decades. Physical wounds, yes, but also the kind that linger in memory and dreams. This was not just another summer storm. The Plainfield tornado became the deadliest in Illinois in nearly 40 years, and the only F5 ever recorded in the month of August. Its suddenness, its power, and above all its lack of warning, forced a reckoning about what failed, who paid the price, and how such a disaster could happen in a place where no one thought it possible. High above Plainfield, the sky held secrets no one at ground level could imagine. Atmospheric soundings from that afternoon recorded convective available potential energy, CAPE, between 7,000 and 8,000 joules per kilogram. In meteorological terms, that's a powder keg. For comparison, even the most severe spring outbreaks in the Midwest rarely see numbers this high. The air was overloaded with heat and moisture, primed for explosive storm development. What made this setup so unusual wasn't just the intensity, but the timing. August in Illinois is typically past the peak for violent tornadoes. Yet, on this day, a powerful jet stream, unusually strong for late summer, raced overhead. Winds aloft clocked in at record speeds, slicing southeast from the Canadian border. This pattern is called northwest flow, and it's notorious among meteorologists for producing fast-moving, long-lived supercells. But it almost never happens this far north, this late in the season. Surface maps showed a stationary front parked just north of Plainfield, dividing oppressive tropical air to the south from drier, cooler air to the north. The clash created a narrow corridor where storms could feed on the best ingredients from both sides. Radiosonde balloons launched from Chicago and Peoria that morning recorded surface temperatures in the low to mid-90s, with dew points in the mid-70s. The result? An atmosphere with barely any cap, meaning there was little to stop an updraft from punching skyward if given the chance. Despite the explosive instability, wind shear, how winds change with height, was only moderate, not the classic setup for a violent tornado outbreak, but the intersection of boundaries near Plainfield locally boosted low-level rotation, compensating for what the broader environment lacked. Storms riding this boundary could tap into hidden pockets of spin, a factor only visible in hindsight through forensic analysis of the data. On radar, these ingredients didn't stand out as dangerous. The technology of 1990 couldn't see the subtle twists in the wind or the surging updrafts inside the storm. To the naked eye, and to most forecasters, it was just another severe thunderstorm warning day, until the energy in the atmosphere found its outlet. Inside the National Weather Service office on August 28, 1990, forecasters watched storms flicker across a green and black radar screen. The WSR-57 radar, their primary tool, offered only grainy reflectivity images, no Doppler, no velocity data, and no way to see the wind's hidden twists. Operators tracked a supercell moving southeast, but the display showed nothing out of the ordinary for a late summer thunderstorm. The classic hook echo, a sign of tornado potential, was faint and easily lost in the clutter. No bright red or green velocity couplet flashed warnings of rotation. To the staff, it looked like a strong storm, not a killer. Procedures required visual confirmation before activating sirens. That meant waiting for a spotter to see a funnel, or at least a wall cloud. But the tornado that formed outside Oswego was buried in rain, completely invisible from the ground. Trained volunteers, stationed along county roads and parking lots, saw only a greenish wall, wind, rain, and flying debris. The phone lines stayed quiet. No one called in a sighting, so no alert went out. Meanwhile, the radar's limitations grew more dangerous by the minute. The Marseille site, responsible for the region, had suffered lightning damage earlier in the season. The Doppler add-on was disabled, and operators struggled with maintenance errors and sequencing glitches. Even if someone had suspected trouble, the system's authority for issuing warnings rested with the Chicago office, which was responsible for dozens of counties. The team on duty that afternoon had not recently trained for surprise tornado scenarios and relied heavily on standard procedures and climatology. August was not tornado season in Illinois, and the idea of an F5 was almost unthinkable. Inside the NWS office, logs and memos from that day reveal a focus on severe thunderstorms, not tornadoes. Routine warnings were issued for hail and high winds, but no one escalated the threat. The warning cascade, spotter, phone call, radar confirmation, never began. The tornado was already on the ground, carving a path toward Plainfield, while the system waited for evidence it could never see. The blind spot wasn't just technological. It was procedural, cultural, and rooted in a belief that the worst could not happen here, not now. By the time the first tornado warning was issued, the damage was already done. Inside Plainfield High School, the afternoon routine shattered in seconds. Coach Wayne DeSutter, sensing the weather turned strange, blew his whistle and cut football practice short. He hustled over 100 athletes and staff indoors, urging them to move quickly. There was no siren, no intercom warning, just instinct and urgency. In the gym, volleyball players packed up, still in uniform, as the sky outside turned a sickly green. DeSutter directed everyone into a central hallway, away from windows, pushing them to the floor. Some students rolled their eyes, thinking it was just another drill. But within moments, the building began to shake. The roar hit like a freight train. Ceiling tiles crashed down, glass exploded, and the lights flickered out. In the chaos, students clung to each other, pressed against the lockers. The tornado tore through the school, ripping off the roof and hurling debris down the corridors. In one classroom, science teacher Stephen Hunt tried to shield his students. A semi-trailer, picked up by the wind, smashed through the wall, killing Hunt instantly. Survivors later described the sound as deafening, like the world coming apart all at once. When it was over, the hallway where DeSutter had gathered the students was the only section of the building left, mostly intact. Every other part of the school was gutted. More than 100 teenagers and staff walked out alive, dazed and bloodied, stepping over wreckage and fallen lockers. For many, the line between survival and disaster was measured in seconds and the actions of a single coach. The loss of Mr. Hunt, beloved by students and faculty alike, hung over the scene. His death became a symbol of how quickly everything changed, and how even the safest places offered no guarantee. Outside, the storm moved on, leaving behind silence and the first hints of grief. Crest Hill Lakes Apartments stood just beyond the tornado's path through Plainfield, a cluster of low-rise buildings meant to offer affordable shelter for families and young parents. At 3:40 p.m., the storm arrived without warning, tearing into the complex with winds strong enough to rip walls from their foundations and send roofs tumbling into the nearby fields. In seconds, entire apartments vanished. The debris field stretched for hundreds of yards, scattering furniture, clothing, and shattered glass across what had been quiet lawns. Some residents never had a chance to move from their chairs. Others, like Letitia Herod, just 17, tried to shield her 5-week-old daughter, Titania, as the building collapsed around them. Both were found far from their apartment, carried by the wind and buried under splintered wood and insulation. 6 more people died in that same instant, their names later read aloud at memorials, but their stories lost to the violence of the day. The randomness of survival was everywhere. One room flattened, the next left almost untouched. First responders searching the wreckage found a baby's crib wedged beneath a concrete slab. The child inside somehow alive, while just steps away, entire families were gone. The storm's power left no pattern, no mercy. 8 lives ended at Crest Hill Lakes in less than a minute. For the families who returned, nothing was recognizable. The apartments were reduced to piles of debris, foundations scoured bare, cars flipped and mangled. Survivors wandered through the ruins, clutching what little they could salvage, searching for neighbors and loved ones. The Harrod family's grief became a symbol of loss that reached beyond the complex, a reminder that disaster does not choose its victims, and that in Plainfield, safety depended on nothing more than chance. In just 30 minutes, the tornado tore a scar 16 miles long and half a mile wide across northern Illinois. At its peak, the storm reached F5 strength, winds well over 200 miles per hour. The ground itself was stripped bare in places, with not just grass, but several inches of topsoil ripped away, leaving only raw earth behind. Steel transmission towers that once stood 2 stories tall were twisted to the ground like scraps of wire. A semi-truck, weighing more than 20 tons, was hurled more than half a mile and left crumpled and unrecognizable in a cornfield. Cars landed in trees, and entire blocks of homes vanished as if erased. Neighborhoods that had stood for decades were reduced to open lots and scattered debris. In some subdivisions, every house on the street was flattened, foundations swept clean, driveways ending in nothing. The tornado's path cut through schools, businesses, and shopping centers, leaving behind only splintered beams and twisted metal. The randomness was impossible to predict. One house leveled, the next barely touched. A pattern repeated again and again across Plainfield, Crest Hill, and Joliet. The violence did not let up as the storm moved southeast. Apartment complexes were shredded, churches lost their roofs, and entire groves of trees were snapped or stripped of bark. Emergency crews arriving from neighboring towns found roads blocked by piles of rubble, power lines tangled with downed trees, and neighborhoods unrecognizable. For survivors, it was as if the world had been turned inside out in a matter of minutes. By the time the winds finally died down, nearly 500 homes were destroyed, and more than 1,000 damaged. The damage survey would later confirm what locals already knew. This was not just a tornado, but a force that had erased the familiar landscape, leaving behind only questions and a desperate need for help. Edward Hospital and St. Joseph Medical Center faced the full force of the disaster within minutes. Ambulances, pickup trucks, and even private cars began arriving in waves, each carrying victims pulled from the wreckage. The emergency rooms filled so quickly that staff moved triage outside, setting up makeshift stations in the parking lot. Nurses and doctors worked side by side, some still in street clothes, treating wounds on the hoods of cars and the tailgates of ambulances. The coincidence of a nursing shift change meant extra hands were available, a stroke of luck that likely saved lives. Supplies ran low almost immediately. Blood bags and bandages vanished in the first hour, forcing staff to improvise with whatever they could find. IV drips were hung from tree branches, and wheelchairs became stretchers. Among the hundreds brought in that afternoon was Eddie Butler, a young man found alive but badly injured in the debris. Paramedics recognized the severity of his wounds and rushed him to surgery, but the damage was irreversible. Butler survived, but would never walk again. His story became part of the uncounted toll, survivors whose lives were changed forever in the span of a few minutes. Doctors faced impossible choices about who to treat first. Some patients arrived with broken bones and deep cuts, others in shock, and a few with injuries so severe that nothing more could be done. The hallways echoed with the sounds of pain, grief, and frantic orders. Volunteers from nearby towns poured in, helping wherever they could, holding hands, passing water, or simply sitting with those waiting for news. Inside and out, the hospitals became islands of organized chaos. Staff worked through exhaustion, driven by adrenaline and a sense of duty. For many, the faces of the injured and the stories they carried would linger long after the last wounds healed. The cost of the tornado was measured not just in deaths, but in the lives forever changed by its violence. As dusk settled over Plainfield, the battered landscape filled with the sounds of sirens, engines, and hurried voices. Within hours, help arrived from every direction. Fire trucks and ambulances from 119 different departments lined the ruined streets, their crews working side by side with local police to search for survivors and secure the chaos. The Illinois National Guard rolled in before sunrise, more than 180 soldiers fanning out to set up checkpoints and keep order. Their presence brought a strange comfort, rifles slung over shoulders, uniforms standing out against the backdrop of splintered homes, but also an uneasy reminder of just how quickly normal life had vanished. Looting became an immediate concern. In the first 2 days, police and deputies arrested at least 15 people for theft or breaking curfew. Some tried to slip into damaged stores or pick through the remains of homes, taking what little was left behind. To protect residents and their property, authorities imposed a dusk-to-dawn curfew for 3 nights. Roadblocks went up around the worst-hit neighborhoods. Only those with proof of address or emergency credentials could pass. National Guard troops worked shoulder to shoulder with local officers, manning barricades and escorting convoys of relief supplies. For survivors, the sight of armed patrols was jarring, but most understood the need. Too much had already been lost to risk more. At the same time, Plainfield saw a flood of goodwill. Volunteers arrived by the hundreds, some from neighboring towns, others from across the state. Churches opened their doors as shelters, and school gyms filled with cots and donated blankets. Aid agencies like the Red Cross and Salvation Army coordinated meals, water, and clothing, often working late into the night. The process was not always smooth. Strict credential checks slowed the flow of helpers at first, and some volunteers found themselves turned away until they could prove their purpose. Still, the system held. Relief convoys moved under guard, and distribution sites stayed safe. Amid the confusion, moments of solidarity stood out. Neighbors sharing what little they had left, strangers offering rides or a place to sleep, and first responders refusing to rest until every call for help was answered. Order and compassion existed side by side in those first days. Security measures kept the peace, but it was the combined effort of professionals, volunteers, and ordinary residents that began the long work of recovery. The memory of rifles at checkpoints and the warmth of a shared meal became part of the same story. A community holding together after everything else had been torn apart. In the wake of Plainfield's disaster, the nation's meteorologists and emergency planners faced a hard truth. The technology trusted to protect communities was already obsolete. The radar at the time, known as the WSR-57, could show only where rain was falling, not how the winds inside a storm were twisting. That meant tornadoes hidden by heavy rain, like the one in Plainfield, could pass undetected until it was too late. The absence of a warning wasn't just a local failure, it was a flaw in the entire system. Within months, federal agencies accelerated plans for a new kind of radar, NEXRAD, or Next Generation Weather Radar. Unlike its predecessors, NEXRAD used Doppler technology to measure not just precipitation, but the motion of air inside a storm. For the first time, meteorologists could see the rotation that signals tornado formation, even when the funnel itself was invisible. The rollout was massive. Over 150 NEXRAD sites were built across the country throughout the 1990s, each one linked to local National Weather Service offices. In Illinois, 2 new forecast centers opened, one in Romeoville, another in Lincoln, so that no single office would ever again be responsible for too wide an area or too many counties at once. These upgrades weren't just technical, they changed the culture of warning. Doppler radar allowed forecasters to issue alerts based on wind patterns alone, without waiting for a spotter to confirm a funnel. That meant warnings could go out faster, sometimes with precious minutes to spare. Over the next decade, further improvements, like dual polarization and rapid scanning, made it possible to detect not only rotation, but debris lofted by tornadoes, giving even clearer signals of danger. The Plainfield tragedy forced a nationwide reckoning, leading to a system where technology, not just human eyes, became the first line of defense against storms. The lessons learned in 1990 now echo through every severe weather warning issued in America. Every August 28th at exactly 3:28 p.m., the bells in Plainfield toll 29 times. Each ring marks a life lost, a name remembered in silence by neighbors who gather at the memorial garden or pause wherever they are. For many, this ritual is more than tradition. It's a reminder that safety is never guaranteed, and that the cost of complacency is measured in lives. The town that once numbered just 5,000 now counts over 40,000 residents, each summer bringing new families who may not know the story behind the bells. Yet survivors return year after year, some carrying flowers, others just memories. Among them is Jennifer Sari, who was a child when the tornado erased her neighborhood. She remembers her mother shielding her in a hallway, the world collapsing in a roar with no warning at all. That memory shaped her future. Today, Sari works as a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, training new spotters and pushing for better outreach. She speaks to classrooms and city councils, repeating a lesson learned the hardest way. Warnings are only useful if people believe and act on them. For Plainfield, the bells are both a tribute and a call to vigilance. They echo through a town rebuilt and grown, but never untouched by loss. Every year, as the last chime fades, the message lingers. Preparedness is not just a matter of technology or policy, but of memory and the will to remember. The legacy of the F5 is written not just in reforms or radar, but in the way a community refuses to forget, teaching each new generation that the unseen killer can return, and that remembering is its own kind of defense. On August 28, 1990, Plainfield suffered the only F5 tornado ever recorded in the United States during August, killing 29 people and injuring more than 350, with no official warning sounded. The event revealed critical failures in weather forecasting, radar technology, and community preparedness. Despite investigations and the release of over 500 pages of official reports, why no warning was issued in time remains partly unexplained due to gaps in historical radar data and ongoing questions about communication breakdowns. In response, the nation invested in NEXRAD Doppler radar, established new National Weather Service offices, and expanded weather alert systems. These reforms, documented in federal records, have since saved lives across the country. Today, Plainfield's bells toll each year for the lives lost, serving as a documented reminder. Disaster can strike without warning, and preparedness relies on both technology and community vigilance.